One of the more exciting features available in PowerPoint, a more modern edition, is the Morph transition. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use some of the basic tools it provides for you to get really smooth animations using that Morph feature. But I've also got a couple tricks in store too. It's Mighty Morphin PowerPoint time.
Let's do it, guys! Right, it's Morphin time!
Hi, my name is JJ Atkins. I'm a professional instructional designer and facilitator with over 30 years in the business. If you're interested in taking your animations and your PowerPoint skills to the next level, stay tuned. I've got a lot of nice little tricks to show you. Today, we're focusing on the Morph transition. Welcome to the Slide Hustle. All right, everybody, welcome to the Slide Hustle. Now, we're going to jump right into this in just a second, but let me just start by kind of saying there's a couple little settings here that are going to make this whole process a little bit easier for you. And I'm going to get into them in just a second, but it is one of the essential things to making sure that you can get into some of the more intricate features of how this Morph technology works. Now, let's start with just a simple question. What exactly is a Morph? What's happening here with this little animation tool? And I think I kind of buried the lead here a little bit here. Morph is really a transition as it's labeled inside PowerPoint, but I like to think of it as kind of like an animation cheat. I spent a lot of time doing animations in PowerPoint, and Morph really kind of speeds up the process if you know how to use it properly and kind of cuts a lot of steps out of the process. Now on this slide here, you can see I just have two simple shapes, and all I really did was just save some time by just adding them in before the video started here. There's nothing special about them. They're just circles with a blue color. Nothing more than that. Now, my next slide here is where we get into something a little bit different. This is two new shapes. One, same color, different shape. The second one, different color, different size. And really, when you think of Morph, what you're thinking of, again, is a transition. I need to move from these shapes to these shapes, and I want something of a seamless move from one to the next. Now, again, these are just shapes. I haven't done anything to modify these, but one of the things that kind of helps make this a little bit simpler is if you just create the shapes that you want on your initial slide, then duplicate that slide, and on that second slide, basically determine what you want the final result to be. That's kind of the goal here. And there are some limitations to how this works. So again, I'm going to go over some tips and tricks to kind of ensure success a little bit later on. Stay tuned. We'll get into that in just a second. But what I can do right now is really just the simplest process here, which is just to click on the Morph option up at the top of my transition menu. And you can see it's already kind of showing you how that transition will work. So morphing shapes is really where the Morph transition really kind of shows off a little bit, because it really has an ability to kind of create some really interesting visual effects. Again, we're going from a circle to a pentagon and moving it across the screen at the same time. And on our bottom shape, we're not only moving the position, but we're changing color and size as well. And it's something to keep in mind, because Morph works really, really well with shapes, but it doesn't work well with everything. So bearing in mind how easily it's able to manipulate shapes, you can use that to kind of cheat some stuff a little bit later on. Now, one of the things that I would suggest as you're working with some of these Morph transitions, or really any transition for that matter, is to select one of your shapes, go up under Shape Format, and then open up your selection pane here. Now, I'm doing it through the upper ribbon here. There's several different ways to do this. Don't rely on my method, but this is just the one I kind of use because it's convenient. I like to have the selection pane over here on the right-hand side of the screen, so that way I can kind of take a look at what it is I'm manipulating. And again, that's going to be important a little bit later on. The other thing that I'll also mention here is that if we go under transitions and we do select Morph, which we've done on this object, we do have some effect options that we can fool around with too. We have the ability here is to apply a morph to objects, which are basically the shapes that we have on slide here. But we also have some options to do this with words and characters, and we're going to be getting into that in just a second. But again, notice the limitation. Objects, words, characters, not really anything other than that. I'm going to show you how to kind of manipulate this to get into images a little bit later on, but notice image isn't really an option here. We're going to have to cheat that, so to speak. I'll throw air quotes around that. Okay, so shapes, really easy stuff so far. Let's go ahead and dive into how we morph text. So the idea here is that when you're working with Morph with characters, it's really just a reference to the individual letters in a word. And this is really only going to be effective if you have a word, or rather a pair of words, that share a number of letters. So I've chosen these two words deliberately, title and kettle. They share the pair of T's, the L, and the E, but they're in slightly different positions, and that's where we'll maximize what the potential of what this morph feature has to offer. So I'm going to morph from title to kettle, and you see it does that by itself just by moving a couple letters around and kind of bringing in new letters or fading them in if they didn't exist in the previous word. Okay. Now, I have found it's best to really kind of experiment with this a little bit, see what works for you. But this is a pretty effective way, again, to kind of get some neat animations as you transfer from maybe one kind of concept or one topic to another. Now, remember, this is character driven, so it's all about the individual letter, but we don't have to go that route if you find that's something that doesn't work for you. For example, maybe, just maybe, you are finding that the words that you're using don't have a lot of common letters. In that case, we can go with a different option, and this option is going to allow us to change the words. So under effect options here, words is now the choice that we're making here. And this is some old quote. I can't remember if it's from Shakespeare or Ray Bradbury, but the actual quote is "Something wicked this way comes." Notice "something comes this way" is the same basic words, but they're in a slightly different order. And that's where we can get this morph feature to really kind of do something special. So we're going to morph from "something comes this way" to "something wicked this way comes." And this is what that looks like. So Morph did this all on its own because of the common words that we're using in the phrase. It's able to kind of move those words around and make room for the new one that is showing up. And I've also done a Morph to kind of change it from black to red. So if we were to do this in presentation mode, we would see 3 slides. One would morph to the second slide, and then the second slide would morph to have that red color show up. Okay, so the next morph that we're going to be taking a look at is how we morph icons. And to just be clear, these icons that I'm going to be referring to are icons that are built right within PowerPoint. It's really just a matter of clicking on the Insert button, going under the Icon option, and then you'll open up a menu on the right-hand side where you can search for a myriad, a library of icons. I just chose some nice simple ones that looked relatively similar in size and shape because Morph is going to work a little bit easier with stuff that's similarly sized and similarly shaped. Now, this is where we're going to start getting into one of the real tricks that's important to understanding how Morph works. So what's important about this icon is that it's going to have a similar shape to the other icons I'm going to be showing you, more specifically the circular outline. What's in the middle is going to change. And this is, again, where we get into that little trick as to how this works. In order for Morph to be able to kind of work as effectively as it needs to, some things it can kind of figure out on its own. But other things you're going to have to kind of teach it to notice, if that makes sense. And the demonstration, I think, will kind of drive this home. Our icon right here is not actually just one thing. It is actually 2 items. It's the outline and the squigglies inside the circle that make up the continents. And you can see that right here. I have outline listed here, and this other one's listed as mouth. This is really just a reference to the icon that I want to morph to, which is a smiley face. So I have an outline, and I have a mouth. I have 2 other objects here, in this case, right eye and left eye. And again, you can see I have them labeled over in my selection pane over to the right. But I only have 2 elements on this initial icon, this globe icon. So one I labeled mouth, one I labeled outline. And the reason I'm doing this is because they need to read as the same object from one slide to the other in order for Morph to know what to kind of work with and what to transition between. Now, part of this is also a little secret. You'll see this occasionally in some of the other YouTube videos out there, but I want to make sure that we point it out and really highlight it because it's important to make this whole thing work. And that is the double exclamation point. You can label an object anything you want to label it as long as it's consistent between the 2 slides you're trying to morph between. But the only way that it works is that if you put the double exclamation point before your little label. And the reason I have right eye and left eye labeled is because that's going to morph again into our next slide where we do have outline, right eye, left eye, and we also have a mouth and a couple of brows to deal with too. And I have another icon we'll morph to as well. So let's see how that looks. Quick morph from globe to smiley face, just like so. Then we can do a morph from smiley face to worried, just like that. And morph. It was a little bit more funky, but it's because there's a lot more objects. Now, something else to bear in mind here, that these icons come as just one object. And so what you'll have to do is highlight it, right-click it, and make sure that you ungroup any sort of an icon that you're trying to do this with, so that way you can break it into these separate elements. So I have a couple of other examples here. These aren't really as well done. I'll be honest with you, icons aren't really where this morph technology really shows off, but you can see you can get some really interesting effects if you just fool around with the idea of ungrouping things, then labeling them with a double exclamation point to kind of get some interesting effects. I thought this was interesting. Human to kind of a, I guess that's a lion. Looks a little something like that. So the next thing I'd take a look at is how we put this into something of a more practical workspace. If you're an instructional designer and you work in PowerPoint frequently, you're probably looking for ways to adapt this into some of your presentations. And the beauty of Morph is that it's just so quick to work with. You can accomplish what looks to be a very complicated piece of animation with just a couple of clicks. So let's kind of show you what I mean by that. When I do training classes, I tend to try to do a lot of visual. So when I'm conducting a class, say on PowerPoint, I might pull this PowerPoint upper menu up on a slide and kind of crop it so it's a little bit easier just to kind of focus on that. I've got a red circle here that I'm going to be morphing along with some basic instruction as to what the menu item does. And as I go through each slide, what it'll do is morph from one location to the other. This is largely shape-based morphing. And just to give you an idea what that looks like, you can see that we can go from home to transitions, and we'll get a little definition of what transition means. And then we can go from transition to animation, and then from animation to slideshow. Okay. Now, again, this is all just built into the morph. Notice the only thing I've done here is I put the double exclamation point on the rounded rectangle. That's the shape that the text appears in. And that's just to help it, again, kind of morph and transition as it moves across the slide. Nothing else really needed that distinction because the circle stays the same from one slide to the next, and the actual image of the PowerPoint menu doesn't change anyway. So the only thing that's really moving here is this shape. And as we've established, that shape is something that Morph works with really easily. And then the text and the box right here are basically just something that I've done the double exclamation label on, so it knows to kind of work with that as best it can. Now, this next piece is going to be a little bit different. Morphing images is something that you can do, but with some limitation. In terms of more advanced stuff, I'm going to actually probably do a second video on that a little bit later on. So if there is something that you want to see or some specific morph that you're having a little bit of trouble working with, leave a comment in the comments section and I'll address it in the part 2 video when we get into advanced morphing. In the meantime, let me show you just some basic stuff we can do with images. And the images I'm going to use for this are actually a couple of my own illustrations. So if you're not familiar, I actually do illustration part-time. I also do a lot of caricature work. I do have a channel dedicated to that. But if you have an opportunity, go on, check out JJ Atkins Art, and you'll see some art tutorials in there. All right. Now, moving on here, selfless plug out of the way. This is just kind of a self-portrait caricature, if you want to think of it that way. And the second slide, the one that I'm going to be morphing into, you'll notice here just has the image off screen. So let me kind of show you what that looks like. I've tilted it a little bit and I've taken it off screen. And the reason for that is because the morph into the next slide is really where the animation takes place. So it shows me on screen with a little bit of a word balloon coming out. And when you put the morph all together, it looks a little something like this. So almost like I'm peeking in, saying hi. So show you how that looks again. Okay, so just to clarify here, there's a couple things going on. The morph is actually just the movement of the image onto the slide. Again, in the previous slide, it was off screen, and then it moves on screen just by clicking on the morph button. Now, this really is something you can do a different way. This is really a animated motion path if you wanted to do it that way, or if you prefer, you can do an animation where it appears on screen by flying in from the side. So you don't have to use morph to accomplish this. And to be clear, the word balloon is not a morph either. It is just something that's showing up through a appearance animation. Many different ways to do the same thing in PowerPoint and all these Microsoft applications. But if I was building a motion path, it would be a little bit time consuming, and this is a quick way to get the same task accomplished with a minimal number of steps. Now, again, there's some other stuff that you can do with images, but there are going to be limitations. We'll talk about that in our part 2 video, getting into advanced morphing techniques. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about in this video is something I'm just going to call morph in action. And it's really just taking some of these little tricks and applying them to some sort of an extreme. One of the things I love to do in my videos is show how we can really kind of push what these little tools are capable of to see if we can get some very, very interesting and very, very unique results. So you may have noticed at the beginning of my video, I have kind of a slide hustle intro I do. It looks a little something like this. Essentially what it does is it takes a bunch of elements, pulls them all on screen, and then we get a little appearance animation that says the slide hustle. And this is all done to music. The way that this whole thing is built is through two main features. That's obviously going to be the morph, and the second one is just the appearance animation of the text. So we're going to focus on this right here, the morph aspect, which is bringing all those shapes into a cohesive illustration. And hopefully you recognize that that illustration is meant to be a computer monitor or a computer screen. To be honest, this isn't really an image as much as it is a series of shapes. I created this illustration wholly inside PowerPoint by manipulating some of the shape features and just drawing this out inside the slide. So this wasn't done freehand and imported in later. It's literally just the shapes and the shape tools inside PowerPoint. So notice my selection pane here doesn't really require me to do a whole lot of moving around or adjusting of names or even using the double exclamation point, because I'm using Morph strategically, but also in its most simple way. Now, that's all well and good, but again, there are ways we can take this to the extreme. And as I said before, this is all about Morphin, so I thought I'd show you a really, really interesting morph I used by doing our double exclamation point method. We're going to morph to a Power Ranger. And what are we going to morph from? Well, we're going to morph from the Slide Hustle logo. So here we go. A little bit muddled, but it's really interesting in terms of the effect that it makes, and I had a lot of fun kind of making it. This wasn't very time consuming, but it was a matter of identifying some objects that could easily transform and putting the double exclamation point in front of those so that way they could match up to similar objects in my initial image, just like so. Now, the next time, I've got a lot of stuff planned here, but again, I want to accommodate y'all. So if you have any questions or any topics that you'd like to see, put them in the comments. I'll be sure to get into those videos pretty soon. Part 2 is coming in the near future, but I still got time to add some new elements if there's something you want to see. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. I hope you got something out of this. And don't forget to click that subscribe button, the like button, and the notification bell. I got new videos coming soon. In the meantime, again, thanks for watching. This has been my Slide Hustle.